hopefully the mic is on this time, because I've had issues the last couple streams. But welcome back, everybody. My name is Kris, this is Wizard Way, and today is Silmarillion Saturday. So welcome back, everyone. We're going to read and review a bit more of the Silmarillion. This is by J.R.R. Tolkien. The stream is meant in fair use. I'm going to be adding a heck of a lot of commentary in between everything, so it's not just a straight-up reading. We're not recording an audiobook or anything, so hopefully fair use. Bear with me, I hope. But welcome back. So today we are going to cover part 2 of Chapter 21. Chapter 21 in the Silmarillion is Turanbar. So it's a very long chapter. There are a lot of illustrations. So if you are over on my TikTok, please head over to my YouTube channel. The link is in my bio. That way you will be able to hear audio effects that I put on my voice, because I do that a lot for different characters. And you'll also be able to see all of the really pretty illustrations. This is the 2021 Deluxe Ted Nasmith Illustrated Edition hardcover. So there are some illustrations in here that have never been released prior to this edition. Therefore, if you want to see all the pretty pictures, please go to my YouTube channel. That's where all the good stuff happens. You might also notice that my background is a little bit different. As always, I'm constantly trying to evolve my stream a bit, which means in this case I have switched up the entire orientation of my desk in order to accommodate... Oops. Yoink. In order to accommodate this. So I have a new thing. I have a new thing. Let's celebrate.
How you like that? You gon' like that? How you like that?
How you like that? And if you didn't hear that, it's because you're on TikTok. Go over to YouTube. But yeah, so I finally got my binaural mic. This is from Headwreck. And so if you've never seen a binaural mic before, they look like they have ears on them. This is so that when you wear headphones, I'm able to pan the two microphones all the way to the left and right ears. So it sounds like you are sitting here. As I, tippity tap and use brushes or do music or whisper into each ear, that sort of stuff. It's a completely different listening experience. So now that I have my mic set up, I'm working on getting some effects in line, and once I have the settings the way I want them to be, I will be doing a lot more ASMR streaming. I also even installed a new shelf above my desk that has a bunch of ASMR tools. So I'm excited, and that's going to be happening more frequently, but I wanted to at least celebrate the presence of the new mic. I'm so excited. I'm very excited to use it. I have it on an Elgato low profile mic arm as well. Hashtag not sponsored. I wish. But let's get back into the Silmarillion, shall we? Hoping everyone is having a good day. I know I'm starting a little bit later than typical. So let's catch you guys up, a brief summary of what we covered last week, because the story of Turin takes a lot of twists and turns. Bring my mic a little bit closer. There we go. It takes a lot of twists and turns. So we started talking about the predecessors of Turin, which is basically his father is Hurin, so with an H instead of a T, and Hurin's brother Huor. So the two of them were, at one point they were taken to Gondolin, but they were allowed to leave because they came with the eagles. Once again, we see eagles used in Tolkien's work as like a deus ex machina, but regardless, they got to see Valinor, or not Valinor, they got to see Gondolin and then were allowed to leave, which is super rare. They then basically fostered with a couple of the Noldor kings at the time. In this case, I believe it was Fingon. And so, once we hit the Nirnaeth Arnodiad, which is the 5th battle, or the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Huor and Hurin have a bad time of it. Hurin ends up being taken by Morgoth, set onto a throne at the very top of the mountain, in the various peaks of Thangorodrim, which is the main stronghold of Melkor. And so Morgoth chains him down, gives him, the sight of a Vala, and basically says, you're going to sit here and watch. You're going to sit here and watch as I hunt down your kin and make life miserable for everyone you've ever known and loved. Because Morgoth's kind of a bitch like that. So then we switch from following Hurin to following his son Turin. Now, when Hurin doesn't come back from the 5th battle, his wife Morwen gets really kind of worried that the forces of Morgoth are going to basically hunt her down, and hunt down her son, Hurin's son Turin. So she sends Turin from Dorlomen, which is one of the settlements of the elves, down into Doriath. And because of the House of Men that Turin is from, he is actually welcomed and fostered by King Thingol himself. Kind of a big deal. Thingol was very anti-mortal men for a very long time, but then we had the tale of Beren and Luthien. His daughter Luthien is now married to a mortal man, and so he's kind of rethought his position on mortal men. Therefore, Turin is now allowed to be fostered by him personally. We go through a little bit of Turin's childhood, adolescence, basically. He has a really big tiff with one of the counselors of King Thingol named Cyros. And Cyros basically insults him, and Turin, instigates. Turin instigates, and then he takes it too far. So he bullies Cyros to the point that Cyros is running naked through the woods, fearing for his life as Turin chases him. In order to escape Turin, he jumps over, a cliff over top of part of the river. And in doing so, he misses the other side and falls down and dies in the riverbed. And Turin's like, oh shit. Shit just got real. So, thank you so much. Thank you. So, shit gets real. Happy almost birthday, birthday twin. Hey, welcome. Yes, happy almost birthday to you too. Almost. Is tomorrow. So Turin says, oh god, shit just got real. And rather than beg for forgiveness, because Cyros had kind of been an a-hole to Turin, no excuse for what Turin did. So rather than go through the embarrassment of actually asking for forgiveness, because he is basically like the son Thingol never had. So Thingol was prepared to pardon him. But Turin runs off thinking, this was unpardonable. I shouldn't be pardoned. Hey, no problem, Mikey. I had a bit of a late start this morning, so I got some phlegm still. We're going to try and work through that. So after the death of Cyros, Turin basically self-exiles. He decides, I'm going to go away. This was not okay. He eventually takes up with a band of bandits. Eventually that falls through, and he's like, I think I am a little bit better than living this life of crime with the bandits. he hooks up with a dwarf named Mim. Mim shows him a hidden path up to the top of Amon Rúth, which is a hill that... The name of the hill, Amon Rúth, is Bald Hill. That's what it translates to in Elvish. So, Bald Hill, the top is very smooth, but it's covered with a certain kind of flower, a fern or heather of some sort, and when that is in bloom, it turns the entire top of the mountain blood red. The plant is called Seragon, and Sereg is blood, so it turns blood red. Just a fun detail. Eventually, Beleg Strongbow, who is Turin's bestie from Doriath, finally finds him on Amon Rúth and is like, hey, just so you know, you've been pardoned, and you can come home if you want to. We would love to have you back in Doriath. And Turin says, yeah, no. I still feel bad. It doesn't feel right. So his best friend Beleg is like, well, I'm going to this area called Dimbar. I'm going to Dimbar, where there are a lot of enemies of Morgoth, and they could really use my help, because Beleg is a really amazing warrior, especially archer, but just amazing warrior in general. So he's like, I'm going to Dimbar. You could come with me. And Turin says, no, I don't think I'm going to. I'm gonna go over here and do my own thing. So after a bit, Turin ends up captured by Morgoth's orcs. So he gets into a skirmish and gets taken by the orcs. And so they are transporting him up through Taur Nuhuin, which is, it's an area, we were mentioning Dimbar really quickly. Dimbar is where Beleg was. It's sort of like there's a pass called the Pass of Anach, which goes from the Dimbar area into Taur Nuhuin. So the orcs are taking Turin through Taur Nuhuin, trying to take him back to Thangorodrim, or Angband, which is Morgoth's stronghold in the far north. Beleg catches on to what's happened and goes in pursuit. Along the way, Beleg comes across an elf who has escaped Angband. His name is Gwyndor, one of my personal favorite elves. But he chats with Gwyndor, and Gwyndor's like, you should just leave it alone. This guy's probably in a bad situation. But Beleg's like, no, he's my best friend. We're going to save him. Gwyndor's like, okay. Then I guess we're gonna save him. Let's do it right. By the time they find Turin with the band of orcs, there is a raging thunderstorm happening. And they slay all the orcs. That's not really a problem. They take care of that pretty easily. But once they have slayed the orcs, they're trying to untie Turin and break his bonds. Turin has been in an exhausted daze, and so he's quasi-asleep when they're doing this. In the process of cutting his bonds, they accidentally prick Turin, and thinking that his enemies are all about him and hovering, Turin freaks the fuck out. He freaks out, grabs his sword, and slays the closest what he thinks is an enemy. So he slays the thing closest to him, and then a flash of lightning hits, and he realizes he's just killed his best friend Beleg. Wah, 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 wah. Where's my sound effect? I think I have a sound effect for that. I do. It's not good. Not good times. So... I know that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, forgive me. But Beleg is slain. Turin is in shock. Absolute shock. This is his best friend. And Beleg has mentioned, it is in the text that Beleg says, I'm going after Turin because I love him. And so we can read into that whatever we want. You know, for queer people like me, we're like, he loved him. Whether or not it was returned is completely irrelevant. This is one of the few you could read them as queer characters. So Beleg is amazing, but unfortunately is slain by Turin. So Turin goes into a bit of a shocked stupor. He's just barely able to function. And Gwyndor is just like, what just happened? What do I do? But Gwyndor takes charge because he's awesome. So despite having... in this version, it doesn't mention that Gwyndor lost a hand, but in a different version outside of the Silmarillion, it mentions that Gwyndor actually lost his left hand in a skirmish when he was escaping Angband. So, despite only having one hand, he manages to corral Turin. They bury Beleg, which is super sad. But Gwyndor's like, don't worry about it. Like, this is terrible. I'm so sorry. But I'm going to take care of you. We're going to get you out of here. I know just where to take you. And so he takes him to Eithel Ivrin, which is sort of the source of one of the sacred rivers in Beleriand. And I say sacred because the waters were hallowed by Ulmo, who is the god of the ocean. And really all water. Pardon me. So these waters were hallowed. You can drink the waters of the pools of Ivrin, and it's like breathing life back into you. So Gwyndor, being a smart elf, takes Turin here first, and is just like, these waters will cure you. These waters will give you the will to live again. And sure enough, Turin drinks from them. He comes out of his stupor, and he finally breaks down and weeps for the loss of Beleg. Following that, Gwyndor's just like, okay, now that you're not out of your mind, and have started actually grieving, I'm going to take you down to Nargothrond, which is where Gwyndor was a prince of the Noldor. So he's well known there, and he's like, I'm going to take you down to my people. We're going to nurse you back to health. You're going to be okay. So Gwyndor is amazing, and he doesn't deserve what is going to happen to him next. But I believe that's where we left off. So let me find the page. So we left off right when Turin comes to Nargothrond, and that's where we will be starting today. I know it was a bit of a long summary, but that's what we read last week, so let's continue in the tale of Turin. Take a bit of a drink and clear my throat here, because the throat isn't doing well this morning. And just as a quick bit of shameless self-promotion, if you are over on TikTok, there is a link in my bio to a wish list. It is my Throne Gifts wish list, where basically you can give me money toward gifts for my birthday or for my Valinor house or what have you. If you'd like to support me and give me a gift for my birthday, that is an easy way that you can do that. The link for that is in my bio, and if you are over on YouTube/Twitch, I have a link right up here. So if you follow that link, that'll take you to the main landing page for my gift list, and there are different tabs, different sections that you can look at. So if you want to give me something specifically for ASMR, or for my Starscape pendants, or for the Valinor house, or even books, I have a specific set of Tolkien books that I'm trying to collect. All of that stuff is in different sections, and you can choose what you want to get me if you want to get me something for my birthday. But there's zero pressure. I'm just, shameless self-promotion. It's up there if you want to take advantage. I know, why can't it end well? Poor Gwyndor. Gwyndor is he's such a tragic character. And we will get into exactly why. Gwyndor is my sweet cinnamon bun. He doesn't deserve all the bad things that happened to him. Which is why he was I think he was the first. He was the first character I ever wrote in my own fanfiction. Gwyndor was the first, because I was like, this boy deserves the world. This boy deserves to find love and happiness and peace in Valinor, and so that's what I wrote. He ends up with Thranduil, and everything's fine. Alright. But let's get back into the story, shall we? Ooh. My body is rebelling. My eye's like, yeah, no, not today. Okay. So just to reread the last section where we left off. And now they arose, and departing from Aethel Ivrin, they journeyed southward along the banks of Narog, until they were taken by scouts of the elves, and brought as prisoners to the hidden stronghold. Thus did Turin come to Nargothrond. And that's where we left off. Alright, so let's continue from there, shall we? At first, his own people did not know Gwyndor, who went out young and strong, and returned now seeming as one of the aged among mortal men, because of his torments and his labors. But Finduilas, daughter of Orodreth the king, knew him and welcomed him, for she had loved him before the Nirnaeth, and so greatly did Gwyndor love her beauty that he named her Faelivrin, which is the gleam of the sun on the pools of Ivrin. For Gwyndor's sake, Turin was admitted with him into Nargothrond, and he dwelt there in honor. But when Gwyndor would tell his name, Turin checked him, saying, Sorry. Gosh. I can't remember which voice I've been using for Turin. Okay. I think I gave him the deep one. Oh gosh, I'm gonna kick myself if this is wrong. Whoops. Turin checked him, saying,
I am Agorwine, the son of Umarth, which is the blood-stained son of ill-fate, a hunter in the woods.
And the elves of Nargothrond questioned him no more. So he basically gave a fake name, and he's like, just call me this. Because I am blood-stained and unlucky. So he literally names himself Agorwine, which is blood-stained. Son of Umarth, which is bad luck or ill fate. Blood-stained son of ill fate. That doesn't bode well. But that's basically what he thinks of himself. That's sort of his mental state. After killing his best friend, we can sort of understand where he's coming from there. So the elves of Nargothrond questioned him no more. In the time that followed, Turin grew high in favor with Orodreth, and well-nigh all hearts returned to him in Nargothrond, for he was young, and only now reached his full manhood, and he was in truth the son of Morwen, Elethwen, to look upon. He looked like her, basically. Dark-haired and pale-skinned, with grey eyes, and his face more beautiful than any other among mortal men in the elder days. His speech and bearing were that of the ancient kingdom of Doriath, and even among the elves he might be taken for one from the great houses of the Noldor, especially with his coloring. Having dark hair and grey eyes is one of the very common colorings for the Noldor elves, just as a note. He might be taken for one from the great houses of the Noldor. Therefore, many called him Adnevil, or Adanavel, my bad. Emphasis on the wrong syllable. Adanavel, the elf man. Adan is man, Evel is elf, so Adanavel is man elf, or elf man. The sword Anglachel was forged anew for him by cunning smiths of Nargothrond. That is his sword, which unfortunately is the blade that he killed Beleg with. This is a very special sword, and we will see more of it throughout the story. So it was forged anew for him, and though ever black, its edges shone with pale fire. And he named it Gurthang, Iron of Death. So great was his prowess and skill in warfare on the confines of the guarded plain that he himself became known as Mormigil, the Black Sword. And the elves said,
The Mormigil cannot be slain, save by mischance or an evil arrow from afar.
Therefore they gave him dwarf mail to guard him, and in a grim mood he found also in the armories a dwarf mask all gilded, and he put it on before battle, and his enemies fled before his face. So he wears a golden dwarf mask, which makes me think the visual that comes into my head with that is specifically the masks that the samurai in Japan would wear, in feudal Japan. They would wear these face masks that would not only help protect their faces during battle, but they were in these gnarled, twisted expressions, like battle cries. And from afar, they looked scary. So that's the visual that comes into my head. And I need another drink. Pardon me. My goodness. If nothing else will do Elmo. I can't do that as well as Dawn does, though. I can do a Gollum voice better than Elmo. And Elmo refers to Elmo in third person, which always throws me off. Alright, so he is fearsome in battle, and wearing this dwarf mask makes him even more terrifying. Then the heart of Finduilas was turned from Gwyndor, and against her will her love was given to Turin. But Turin did not perceive what had befallen, and being torn in heart, Finduilas became sorrowful, and she grew wan and silent. But Gwyndor sat in dark thought, and on a time he spoke to Finduilas, saying, Daughter of the house of Finarfin, let no grief lie between us, for though Morgoth has laid my life in ruin, you still I love. Go whither love leads you, yet beware. It is not fitting that the elder children of Iluvatar should wed with the younger, nor is it wise, for they are brief and soon pass, to leave us in widowhood while the world lasts. Neither will fate suffer it unless it be once or twice only, for some high cause of doom that we do not perceive. But this man is not Beren. A doom indeed lies upon him, as seeing eyes may well read in him, but a dark doom. Enter not into it, and if you will, your love shall betray you to bitterness and death. For hearken to me. Though he be indeed Agorwain, son of Umarth, his right name is Turin, son of Hurin, whom Morgoth holds in Angband, and whose kin he has cursed. Doubt not the power of Morgoth Bauglir. Is it not written in me? So, Gwyndor gets some speaking lines, yes. So Gwyndor outs Turin to Finduilas, saying who he actually is. And he's just like, I know you like the guy, but he's from a family that's been cursed. Like, Morgoth cursed Hurin and his family. It's not a good idea to get involved. And Gwyndor's right, as he typically is. He's like, don't get involved. He's like, and it's super, super rare for elves and men to actually get together and stay together. This is relatively recently after the tale of Beren and Luthien, and so that's sort of on a lot of people's minds. That, well, Luthien married a mortal man, and when he died, she went with him to Mandos and begged that their spirits not be parted, and so Namo, aka Mandos, took pity on them and let them both return to have a second mortal life together. And when they die from that second mortal life, they will both die as humans. Which means that while they don't know what the ultimate fate for mortals is, they pass through the halls of Mandos and then poof, we don't know what happens. But at least Beren and Luthien will be able to do that together. They won't be parted. So that's super, super ultra rare. And I think the only reason it really worked for Luthien is because she was half Maya. Her mother was a Maya, which is one of the divine beings in Tolkien's world. So, coming from that sort of heritage, she had a bit more power and a bit more sway with the Valar, including Mandos. Finduilas would definitely not have that advantage. Not at all. So Gwyndor is warning her, you know, this is Turin, son of Hurin. His family's been cursed. You'd be better off leaving him alone. Do you think you're better off alone? Do 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 do. Someone cue the techno. So Gwyndor basically ends by saying that don't doubt the power of Morgoth to actually curse somebody. Those aren't just words. He cursed this guy and his family. And don't doubt that he can do it. Because is his treatment not written in me? I appear as an old mortal man, like I have been destroyed by Morgoth. He's missing a hand. It's not a good look for Gwyndor. And he's just like, don't doubt that Morgoth will follow through on this whole curse thing. He will do it. Take it seriously, please. Okay. Then Finduilas sat long in thought, but at last she said only,
Turin, son of Hurin, loves me not, nor will.
Now when Turin learnt from Finduilas of what had passed, he was wrathful, and he said to Gwyndor,
In love I hold you, for rescue and safekeeping. But now you have done ill to me, friend, to betray my right name, and call my doom upon me, from which I would lie hid.
But Gwyndor answered, The doom lies in yourself, not in your name. Gwyndor's so smart. He's like, you're cursed. You're cursed. It's not just your name, as if you take another name and you're gonna be fine. You yourself are cursed. Like, deal with it. When it became known to Orodreth that the Mormigil was in truth the son of Hurin Thalion, he gave him great honor, and Turin became mighty among the people of Nargothrond. But he had no liking for their manner of warfare, of ambush and stealth and secret arrow, and he yearned for brave strokes and battle in the open. And his counsels weighed with the king ever the longer the more. In those days, the elves of Nargothrond forsook their secrecy and went openly to battle, and great store of weapons were made. And by the council of Turin, the Noldor built a mighty bridge over the Naurog from the doors of Felagund for the safer passage of their arms. For the swifter passage of their arms, pardon me. Then the servants of Angmund were driven out of all the land between Naurog and Sirion eastward, and westward to the Nenning, and the desolate Falas. And though Gwyndor spoke ever against Turin in the council of the king, holding it an ill policy, he fell into dishonor, and none heeded him, for his strength was small, and he was no longer forward in arms. Thus Nargothrond was revealed to the wrath and hatred of Morgoth. But still, at Turin's prayer, his true name was not spoken. And though the fame of his deeds came into Doriath and to the ears of Thingol, rumor spoke only of the black sword of Nargothrond. So Turin gains a bunch of favor. He asks Gwyndor to not use his real name. And Gwyndor's like, okay, but you're still cursed. And so, because his true name is hidden, even though he has all of these valorous deeds that he's doing in Nargothrond, even when word does get taken back to his foster father, King Thingol in Doriath, they don't know who he is. They just think that, some elf or man is doing amazing things in Nargothrond and good for them, I guess. So we're going to switch gears really quickly, and we're going to be heading over to the other part of Turin's family. Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, the house elf. You don't have to jump around. I appreciate it, though. If you are jumping around, highly recommend you go to my YouTube. That's where I really need the watch minutes. In order to qualify for AdSense again, I need a lot more minutes watched. So, if you're trying to support me, please head over to my YouTube. That's the best way to support me. Twitch, you can't really do anything. Because I don't stream exclusively on Twitch, I can't be part of their affiliate program, which means there are no subscriptions, there are no ads, which is also kind of nice for you guys. There are no ads, but there are no subscriptions or channel points or any of the good stuff that is typically over there. So, YouTube. YouTube is best for me. Thank you. Thank you for your support, guys. I appreciate that. Let's continue. In that time of respite and hope, when because of the deeds of the Mormegil the power of Morgoth was stemmed west of Sirion, Morwen, that's Turin's mother, Morwen fled at last from Dorlomen with Nienor, her daughter, and adventured the long journey to Thingol's halls. There new grief awaited her, for she found Turin gone, and to Doriath there had come no tidings since the dragon helm had vanished from the lands west of Sirion. But Morwen remained in Doriath with Nienor as guests of Thingol and Melian, and they retreated with honor. So again, because Turin has been going under a pseudonym for a while, nobody knows what's happened to him. And at this point, I'm not even sure that news of Beleg's death has even come to Doriath yet, which is very sad. Now it came to pass, when 495 years had passed since the rising of the moon, in the spring of the year there came to Nargothrond 2 elves, named Gelmir and Arminas. They were of Angrod's people, but since the Dagor Bragolach, they dwelt in the south with Círdan the shipwright. From their far journeys they brought tidings of a great mustering of orcs and evil creatures under the eaves of Ered Wethrin, and in the pass of Sirion. And they told also that Ulmo had come to Círdan, giving warning that great peril drew nigh to Nargothrond.
Hear the words of the Lord of Waters,
they said to the king.
Thus he spoke to Círdan the shipwright. The evil of the north has defiled the springs of Sirion, and my power withdraws from the fingers of the flowing waters. But a worse thing is yet to come forth. Say, therefore, to the Lord of Nargothrond, shut the doors of the fortress, and go not abroad. Cast the stones of your pride into the loud river, that the creeping evil may not find the gate.
So just to clarify, that was a message from Ulmo, the god of the sea, god of water, given through the elves of the Falas, which are headed by Círdan, the shipwright. You will probably recognize Círdan because he is still the shipwright at the end of The Lord of the Rings when all the elves are traveling west out of the Grey Havens, including Frodo. So Frodo and Bilbo get to go over the sea. Círdan the shipwright is still the one in charge of the Havens. And you gotta think, that's like 6,000 years in the future at this point. So this is much, much earlier than that. Thank you, Larson. Ooh, go to the club. Hell yeah. Hopefully we can get through the chapter before you leave. So, Ulmo is warning Orodreth, close the doors. Like, cast down this bridge that you've built. Stop being so prideful, because winter is coming, basically. The dark forces are going to come, and if you don't want them to just storm your gate, you should get rid of the bridge that goes directly into your realm. How about that? Orodreth was troubled by the dark words of the messengers, but Turin would by no means hearken to these counsels, and least of all would he suffer the great bridge to be cast down, for he was become proud and stern, and would order all things as he wished. Bad form, Turin. Hi, Gray. Are you gonna come over? You can come over. It's there if you want it. Putting a cat bed next to me. No? Okay. If he gets adventurous. That way you'll at least be able to see him down there. So, Turin's like,
I don't care. I do what I want.
and that's gonna bite him in the butt. Soon afterwards, Handir, lord of Brethiel, was slain, for the orcs invaded his land, and Handir gave them battle. But the men of Brethiel were worsted, and driven back into their woods. And in the autumn of the year, biding his hour, Morgoth loosed upon the people of Narog a great host that he had long prepared, and Glaurung, the Urulokki, passed over Anfauglith. This is a lot of Elvish words, I apologize. And came thence into the north vales of Sirion, and there did great evil. Under the shadows of Ered Wethrin, he defiled the Eithil Ivrin, which was that pool that Gwyndor took Turin to. And thence he passed into the realm of Nargothrond, and burned the Talat Dirnin, the guarded plain between Narog and Teglin. I'm going to grab the map because that was an awful lot of geography there. So we're going to review that, but I'm going to show you guys the map. So again, if you are on TikTok, please head over to my YouTube channel so you can see the map. Alright. Let's switch it up. Okay. So here once again is our map of Beleriand. There we go. Shift a little bit here. My feet are going numb. Alright. So we just went over an awful lot. Just as a bit of a reminder, zoom in here a little bit. So here is Tower na Fuin. When we started reading today, Gwyndor and Beleg had followed the orcs into Tower na Fuin and going toward Amfalgwyth. So, Turin was found and freed, but that's where Beleg gets killed. So from there, they go back through the Pass of Anach and go directly west. And this is where Eithel Ivrin is. In the mountains of Ered Wethrin, we do hear Ered Wethrin referred to an awful lot. So that is this long mountain range here. Like, it's a pretty big mountain range. It's the entirety right here. So, Dorlomin is actually where Turin is from, where he grew up with his family. And he was sent from Dorlomin down to Doriath. But he gets taken by Gwyndor over to Eithel Ivrin, and then they travel down the river to Nargothrond. Nargothrond is sort of hidden in these hills, and they mentioned that when Glaurung the dragon comes with Morgoth's forces, they come down into this area, from Tol Sirion, the Pass of Sirion, down to the Talath Dirnan, which is the guarded plain. So they burn all of this, which is no bueno, and they basically come to Nargothrond. Because the elves are no longer stealthy, Turin just was like, let's not be so stealthy, let's meet them in open battle. Because of that, they pushed all the orcs out of this area, but then a dragon comes and, ruins all of that progress. And now, the forces of Morgoth know exactly where Nargothrond is. Whereas before, it was a hidden realm. It was hidden. Much like Gondolin. Morgoth didn't know where either of these realms were, and so they really showed Morgoth their hand. And Morgoth, he's not completely stupid all the time, right? So he sees an opportunity and he takes it. So hopefully that explains a little bit of the mechanics here. So dragon comes down here, all of Talath Dirnan is set ablaze, basically, and then they come to Nargothrond. So bad news bears. Now that you have a bit of geography, let's switch it back up. Okay. Just setting them aside. Grab a drink of water and then we'll continue. Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you, Larson. I appreciate you, watching the replays, even if you don't end up being able to finish with me. I know these streams tend to get a little long. Okay. So they burned the Talath Dirnan, the guarded plain between Narog and Teglin, which are two rivers. Then the warriors of Nargothrond went forth, and tall and terrible on that day looked Turin, and the heart of the host was upheld, as he rode on the right hand of Orodreth. But greater far was the host of Morgoth than any scouts had told, and none but Turin, defended by his dwarf mask, could withstand the approach of Glaurung. And the elves were driven back and pressed by the orcs into the field of Tumhalad, between Ginglith and Narog, again, rivers. And there they were penned. So, unfortunately, dragons be dragons, and the only one who's able to withstand the power of that dragon is Turin, because of the dwarf mask that he's wearing. Because the dwarves are awesome, and they make really, really good armor. Hi, Gray. Everyone say hello to Gray. Are you visiting? My good boy. A little bit of kitty time. Oh, he's purring, though. You're purring. Gray. They tend to hear me from the other part of my apartment. I guess it's not technically an apartment. Oh, do you want to come up? Okay. And cat butt. Nothing but cat butt. Hi. I love you too. Gray. Hey, Gray. He's like, no. He's like, you let me up here. Deal with the consequences. Hi, Gray. I love you too. Come on. He's like, no, I'm not done. Gray. Oh my goodness, you are shedding. It's because it got a lot hotter here recently, didn't it? The weather is changing in this area, so it went from being like a pleasant mid-70s up to the 90s. Hi, Gray. Can I give you a hug, and then will you go? I'm hoping you guys can hear him since he's right near the mic. Good boy. Thank you, Gray. Such a good boy. Are you gonna settle down? Okay. Kitty. Gray is short for Dorian Gray. Gray was he was a cat that was bought after we had a black kitten pass away from FIP. Which is feline infectious peritonitis. It's relatively rare, but it's like a mutation of a virus, and when it hits kittens, they tend to die before they're 6 months old. We were lucky. We had Dorian for, I think, 22 months. He was just under 2 years old when he passed. Bye, Gray. But we had a kitten named Dorian who had passed away, and so we named Gray as sort of a namesake. So he's the other half of Dorian Gray. Oddly, Dorian was very, very attached to my partner before she passed away. But Gray attached himself to me. I am Gray's chosen human. Human. I am Gray's chosen monkey. I do his bidding. So that's what Gray is short for, is Dorian Gray. No, actually, none of my cats have elvish names. None of my cats have elvish names. Sandra and I were naming most of our cats after characters that we were writing in our fiction series. And a lot of them have normal names. And then we had a set of twins. We had a very small litter of just 2 kittens. One of them is gray and white, and the other one is calico. And those ones we named Clover and Thistle. Just so we could call them Chubs and Tubs. And it turned out to be a very apt set of names for them. They are chonky. They are chonky kitties. Now, the only 2 that I have with me are Gray and Alana. Those are my 2 cats. The others are still in Florida with my roommates. The other end of the polyamory polycule, we call it. So, I love kitties. I love cats. I do very well with them. I don't do as well with dogs at all. I'm so not a dog person. It's a different kind of needy, you know? Okay, where were we? So the elves were driven back and pressed by the orcs into the field of Halad. So that's where they are penned by the dragon, Glaurung. On that day all the pride and host of Nargothrond withered away, and Orodreth was slain in the forefront of the battle, and Gwyndor, son of Gwylin, was wounded to the death. But Turin came to his aid, and all fled before him, and he bore Gwyndor out of the rout, and escaping into a wood, there laid him in the grass. Then Gwyndor said to Turin, "Let bearing pay for bearing. But ill-fated was mine, and vain is thine, for my body is marred beyond healing, and I must leave Middle-earth. And though I love thee, son of Húrin, yet I rue the day that I took thee from the orcs. But for thy prowess and thy pride, still I should have love and life, and Nargothrond should yet stand a while. Now if thou love me, leave me, haste thee to Nargothrond and save Finduilas. And this last I say to thee, she alone stands between thee and thy doom. If thou fail her, it shall not fail to find thee. Farewell." Very, very flowery way of speaking. Thee and thou and thine. But Gwyndor's just like, leave me. Leave me and save Finduilas. Like, Gwyndor still loves Finduilas. And he's like, the only thing I can ask from you now, is that you save the woman that I love. Save the elf I love. And at this point, she is the only offspring of Orodreth, so technically she is Queen of Nargothrond now. So he's like, save Finduilas. If you can do anything, please save Finduilas. And if your fate is tied to hers. If she dies, then fate is going to find you whether you like it or not. Then Turin sped back to Nargothrond, mustering such of the rout as he met with on the way, and the leaves fell from the trees in a great wind as they went, for the autumn was passing to a dire winter. See, I was right, winter was coming. But the host of the orcs and Glaurung the dragon were there before him, and they came suddenly, ere those that were left on guard were aware of what had befallen on the field of Halad. In that day, the bridge over Narog proved an evil, for it was great and mightily made, and could not swiftly be destroyed. And the enemy came readily over the deep river, and Glaurung came in full fire against the doors of Felagund, and overthrew them, and passed within. And even as Turin came up, the dreadful sack of Nargothrond was well nigh achieved. The orcs had slain or driven off all that remained in arms, and were even then ransacking the great halls and chambers, plundering and destroying. But those of the women and maidens that were not burned or slain they had herded on the terraces before the doors, as slaves to be taken into Morgoth's thraldom. Upon this ruin and woe Turin came, and none could withstand him, or would not, though he struck down all before him, and passed over the bridge, and hewed his way towards the captives. And now he stood alone, for the few that followed him had fled. But in that moment Glaurung issued from the gaping doors, and lay behind, between Turin and the bridge. Then suddenly he spoke, by the evil spirit that was in him, saying,
"Hail, son of Húrin, well met."
Then Turin sprang about and strode against him, and the edges of Gurthang shone as with flame. That's his sword, Gurthang. But Glaurung withheld his blast, and opened wide his serpent eyes and gazed upon Turin. Without fear, Turin looked into them as he raised up the sword, and straightway he fell under the binding spell of the lidless eyes of the dragon, and was halted moveless. Then for a long time he stood as one graven of stone. And they too were alone, silent before the doors of Nargothrond. But Glaurung spoke again, taunting Turin, and he said,
Evil have been all thy ways, son of Hurin. Thankless, fostering, outlaw, slayer of thy friend, thief of love, usurper of Nargothrond, Captain foolhardy and deserter of thy kin. As thralls, thy mother and thy sister live in Dor Momin, in misery and want. Thou art arrayed as a prince, but they go in rags. And for thee they yearn, but thou carest not for that. Glad may thy father be to learn that he hath such a son, as learn he shall.
And Turin, being under the spell of Glaurung, hearkened to these words. And he saw himself as in a mirror misshapen by malice, and loathed that which he saw. And while he was yet held by the eyes of the dragon in torment of mind, and could not stir, the orcs drove away the herded captives, and they passed nigh to Turin and crossed over the bridge. Among them was Finduilas, and she cried out to Turin as she went, but not until her cries and the wailing of the captives was lost. Upon the northward road did Glaurung release Turin, and he might not stop his ears against that voice that haunted him after. Okay, I'm going to pause really briefly because there are two illustrations that I want to share. Not one, but two! One is from the Battle of Halad, and the other is Turin and the Dragon.
I agree.
Okay, let's switch things up, shall we? There we go. Once again, if you are on TikTok, please head over to my YouTube channel so you can see all of the illustrations. Alright. So here is Turin during the Battle of Halad, wearing the dwarf mask as he rides into battle. Looking fell as fuck. Not too much to really point out in this picture. Though you can see that this is when he's bearing Gwyndor out of the battle. Gwyndor with his gray hair, because he looks like an aged mortal man now. And slightly inaccurate because he shouldn't have one hand, but that's missed in all of Ted Nasmith's artwork, honestly. So Gwyndor is taken out of the battle. And I think the other one is vertical. Yes? Yes. Okay, so we're gonna switch the camera again. Okay. This one works a little bit better for vertical. So this is Glaurung the dragon, attacking Nargothrond. This would be a view from the north. So north looking south. because you have Nargothrond on the right-hand side. So there is the bridge that they had built, which let the orcs right in. Good job, Turin. And I mean, at this point, nobody knew to not look a dragon in the eyes. No one knew. No one knew that was a thing. But Morgoth is tricksy, and so he worked that into the evil design of the dragons. So Glaurung has a truly piercing gaze, not glaze. Like he's a confection. He has a piercing gaze, which basically temporarily turns Turin to stone. He's petrified. Petrified in the, more realistic sense. Literal sense. So, the last survivors, the women and children, are being enslaved and carted off, and that's Finduilas there. And she would canonically have been blonde, because she's the daughter of Orodreth, and Orodreth, at least originally, was one of the sons of Finarfin. I believe that's changed back and forth a couple times. Like, sometimes he's from the house of Fingolfin, and other times he's from the house of Finarfin. But yeah, just got a lot of billowing smoke at the top of the page, so that's pretty much the illustration. So Turin is stuck there, he can't do anything, and so Finduilas is calling out for him, and he can't move. So, that's no bueno. Alright, let's continue, shall we? I'm gonna shift and get some water again. Yikes. At least Gray finally settled down. You're super cute, Gray. He's my thick boy. You're practically overflowing in that cat bed. He's a sweetheart. And he's on a diet, but I don't think he's losing any weight. He's like, how dare you? You're super cute, Gray. My thick boy. That's a thick-ass boy. Gays are usually piercing. That's even better. The piercing gaze. I love it. The piercing gaze of Glaurung. That sounds like it could be like a band. A band made entirely of gay folk. The piercing gaze. Oh man, that'd be funny. The piercing gaze of Glaurung. Okay. So the cries of Finduilas are basically echoing in Turin's ears, and we can continue from there. Then suddenly Glaurung withdrew his glance and waited, and Turin stirred slowly as one waking from a hideous dream. Then coming to himself, he sprang upon the dragon with a cry, but Glaurung laughed, saying,
If thou wilt be slain, I will slay thee gladly. But small help will that be to Morwen and Nienor. No heed didst thou give to the cries of the elf woman. Wilt thou deny also the bond of thy blood?
But Turin drawing back, his sword stabbed at the dragon's eyes, and Glaurung, coiling back swiftly, towered above him and said,
Nay, at least thou art valiant beyond all whom I have met, and they lie who say that we are, of our part, do not honor the valor of foes. See now, I offer thee freedom. Go to thy kin, if thou canst. Get thee gone, and if elf or man be left to make tale of these days, then surely in scorn they will name thee, if thou spurnest this gift.
Then Turin, being yet bemused by the eyes of the dragon, as were he treating with a foe that could no pity, believed the words of Glaurung, and turning away he sped over the bridge. But as he went, Glaurung spoke behind him, saying in a fell voice,
Haste thee now, son of Hurin, to Dor Lomin, or perhaps the orcs shall come before thee once again, and if thou tarry for Finduilas, then never shalt thou see Morwen again, and never at all shalt thou see Nienor, thy sister, and they will curse thee.
Them's fighting words from this dragon. But of course, we, as the reader, know that Morwen and Nienor are not in Dor Lomin right now. They are in Doriath. And I'm not sure if Glaurung knew that, if that was just part of the deception. But he's saying, don't try and come after Finduilas. Either you give up her, or you give up your mother and sister. Which, you know, he's bluffing, but... but Turin doesn't know that. But Turin passed away on the northward road, and Glaurung laughed once more, for he had accomplished the errand of his master. Then he turned to his own pleasure, and sent forth his blast, and burned all about him. But all the orcs that were busy in the sack he rooted forth, and drove them away, and denied them their plunder, even to the last thing of worth. The bridge he then broke down and cast into the foam of Narog, which is the river. And being thus secure, he gathered all the hoard and riches of Felagund and heaped them, and lay upon them in the innermost hall, and rested a while. So, dragons be doing dragon things. He's like, you guys don't get to plunder this place, this mine. Mine. So he now has a hoard of treasure, and he is sitting on it. Sitting pretty on his treasure trove. And Hurin hastened along the ways to the north, through the lands now desolate between Narog and Teiglin. And the fell winter came down to meet him, for in that year snow fell ere autumn was past, and spring came late and cold. Ever it seemed to him as he went that he heard the cries of Finduilas calling his name by wood and hill, and great was his anguish. But his heart, being hot from the lies of Glaurung, and seeing ever in his mind the orcs burning the house of Hurin, or putting Morwen and Nienor to torment, he held on his way, and turned never aside. So he does give up on Finduilas. He hates himself for it, but he gives up on Finduilas in order to, he thinks, save his mother and sister. Because Glaurung lied and said they're in Dor Lomin and we're gonna do bad things to them. And he's lying. So Turin gave up Finduilas for a thing of smoke and mirrors. Okay, here we go. At last, worn by haste and the long road, for 40 leagues and more he had traveled without rest, he came with the first ice of winter to the pools of Ivrin, where before he had been healed. But they were now but a frozen mire, and he could drink there no more. Thus he came hardly by the passes of Dorlomin, through bitter snows from the north, and found again the land of his childhood. Bare and bleak it was, and Morwen was gone. Her house stood empty, broken, and cold, and no living thing dwelt nigh. Therefore Turin departed, and came to the house of Broda the Easterling, that had he that had to wife Erin, Hurin's kinswoman. And there he learned of an old servant that Morwen was long gone, for she had fled with Nienor out of Dorlomin, none but Erin knew where. I'm sorry, something popped up on my screen there. If that was a gift or something, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. Then Turin strode to Broda's table, and seizing him, he drew his sword, and demanded that he be told whither Morwen had gone. And Erin declared to him that she went to Doriath to seek her son.
For the lands were freed then from evil,
She said.
by the black sword of the south, who now has fallen, they say.
Then Turin's eyes were opened, and the last threads of Glaurung's spell were loosed, and for anguish, and wrath at the lies that had deluded him, and hatred of the oppressors of Morwen, a black rage seized him. And he slew Broda in his hall, and other Easterlings that were his guests. Bad form. Thereafter he fled out into the winter, a hunted man, but he was aided by some that remained of Hador's people, and knew the ways of the wild, and with them he escaped through the falling snow and came to an outlaw's refuge in the southern mountains of Dorlomin. Thence Turin passed again from the land of his childhood, and returned to Sirion's Vale. His heart was bitter, for to Dorlomin he had brought only greater woe upon the remnant of his people, and they were glad of his going. And this comfort alone he had, that by the prowess of the black sword the ways to Doriath had been laid open to Morwen. And he said in his thought,
Then those deeds wrought not evil to all. And where else might I have better bestowed my kin, even had I come sooner? For if the girdle of Melian be broken, then last hope is ended. Nay, it is better indeed that things be. For a shadow I cast wheresoever I come. Let Melian keep them, and I will leave them in peace, unshadowed for a while.
Gray, you are in the way. He's being so cute, though. It's hard to tell him no. Gray, what are you doing? You can't play with the string. He wants to play with the bookmark string now. Gray. He's like, I want the string. Give me the string. No. Gray, no. Move it. He is transfixed. Gray. Thank you. He's like, ugh. Lame. He was going after it. Gray's just going after my bookmark string. So Turin at this point is just thinking, okay, so they made their way to Doriath. This is for the best, because at least Doriath is protected by Melian, who is, again, a Maya, so she has magic powers. The Girdle of Melian is a magic spell that protects the vast majority of Doriath from harm. So he's like, that's fine, let Melian keep them. If Melian has my mother and sister, good for them. I'm not going to go to them because I seem to bring sorrow and woe to everyone around me. So he's, again, thinking not so highly of himself, and probably for good reason. But he's like, I'm not going to go to Doriath. I'm still not going to go back to Doriath because they're better off without me. Now Turin, coming down from Eredwethrin, sought for Finduilas in vain, roaming the woods beneath the mountains, wild and wary as a beast. And he waylaid all the roads that went north to the pass of Sirion, but he was too late, for all the trails had grown old, or were washed away by the winter. Yet thus it was that passing southwards down Teiglin, Turin came upon some of the men of Brethiel that were surrounded by orcs, and he delivered them, for the orcs fled from Gurthan. Again, that's the name of his sword. He named himself Wildman of the Woods, and they besought him to come and dwell with them. But he said that he had an errand yet unachieved, to seek Finduilas, Orodreth's daughter of Nargothrond. Then Dorlas, the leader of these woodmen, told the grievous tidings of her death. For the men of Brethiel had waylaid at the crossings of Teiglin the orc host that led the captives of Nargothrond, hoping to rescue them. But the orcs had at once cruelly slain their prisoners, and Finduilas they pinned to a tree with a spear. So she died, saying at the last,
Tell the Mormigil that Finduilas is here.
Therefore they had laid her in a mound near that place, and named it Hauth en Elith, the mound of the elf-maid. Turin bade them lead him thither, and there he fell down into a darkness of grief that was near death. Then Dorlas, by his black sword, the fame whereof had come even to the deeps of Brethiel, and by his quest of the king's daughter, knew that this wild man was indeed the Mormigil of Nargothrond, the black sword. The black sword of Nargothrond, whom rumor said was the son of Hurin of Dorlomen. Therefore the woodmen lifted him up and bore him away to their homes. Now those were set in a stockade upon a high place in the forest, Ethel Brandir upon Amon Obel. For the people of Halath were now dwindled by war, and Brandir the son of Handir, who ruled them, was a man of gentle mood, and lame also from childhood. Pardon me. I just realized that this character's name is Brandir. Guess who also has a gentle disposition and is lame? Bran in Game of Thrones. Bran? Brandir. Coincidence? I think not. I'd never picked up on that before. This is because I only recently I binged the entirety of Game of Thrones. I never would have picked up on that. How funny. Brandir, the lame and gentle. What the fuck? George R.R. Martin is now just joining the ranks of J.K. Rowling, ripping off Tolkien. I'm not surprised. He's probably reading this and was like, wouldn't it be cool if we told a bigger story about this guy? And we'll throw some incest at it, because incest totally doesn't happen in the story of Turin. Not at all. Completely innocent. Good lord. Tolkien Estate is suing. They wouldn't. It's too well established at this point. But Brandir the Lame. Who knew? Was a man of gentle mood and lame also from childhood, and he trusted rather in secrecy than in deeds of war to save them from the power of the North. Literally everything in that sentence. Everything in that sentence is Game of Thrones. Oh my gosh, I never would have picked that out. That's so funny. Trusted rather in secrecy than in deeds of war to save them from the power of the North. Because again, the North is a very cold place in Game of Thrones, with Winterfell and the Wall. Wow. Wow, I had never picked out that parallel. That's so funny. Therefore he feared that the tidings of Doras... he feared the tidings that Dorlus brought. And when he beheld the face of Turin as he lay on the bier, a cloud of foreboding lay on his heart. Nonetheless, being moved by his woe, he took him into his own house and tended him, for he had skill in healing. And with the beginning of spring, Turin cast off his darkness and grew hale again. And he arose, and he thought that he would remain in Brethiel hidden, and put his shadow behind him, forsaking the past. He took therefore a new name, Turanbar, which in the High Elven speech signified Master of Doom. And he besought the woodmen to forget that he was a stranger among them, or ever bore any other name. Nonetheless, he would not wholly leave deeds of war, for he could not endure that the orcs should come to the crossings of Teglin or draw nigh to Halvan Elith. And he made that a place of dread for them, so that they shunned it. But he laid his black sword by, and wielded rather the bow and the spear. Yeah, that's totally fair. That both Middle-earth and Westeros are modeled after the UK. So, yeah, but Tolkien did it first. Turin needs some therapy. Absolutely he does. I would not be surprised if George R.R. Martin said that he was inspired by Tolkien. Most fantasy writers have been, myself included. You would probably find a bunch of parallels between my fictional world and Tolkien's, though I go very much more in depth into, like, magic, whereas Tolkien tried to avoid it. There are certain things, obviously, you know, a piercing gaze of a dragon has some sort of magical power here. But for the most part, Tolkien really tries to steer clear of, like, magic for magic's sake. He tries to ensure that what we mortals would view as magic is actually just the elves having endless time to perfect a skill. So he likes referring to the elves as just being skilled. Very, very highly skilled. Like, how skilled could you get if you had 1,000 years to master this? But mortal men don't. So the elves are able to master things to a point that they are so advanced as to seem magical to mortals. So that's sort of the way that Tolkien went. Whereas a lot of fantasy writers, we put in magic because it's fun. And because we can then hand wave things and just be like, it's magic, don't worry about it. Don't worry about mechanics. It's just magic. Oh, it's magic. I love that Gray has just settled down there. He's so sweet. And we do have another illustration, so we're going to switch it up again. Show off the illustrations. I'm going to zoom out just a tad. So this is the cold winter Turin traveling in the cold winter. I can't unsee it, though. I can't unsee the parallel now to Game of Thrones. I can't unsee the way this looks like, you know, the hut of the wildlings north of the wall. You're watching The Hobbit while listening to this? Wow, thanks. Gosh, if I'm overshadowing the movies, I'm doing a good job. Thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, so nothing too special, but I don't think I've ever seen this particular drawing, so this might be one of the ones that's exclusive to this edition. Ted Nasmith has done a lot. He's done a lot of work. Alright, back we go. Let us continue. Now new tidings came to Doriath concerning Nargothrond, for some that had escaped from the defeat and the sack, and had survived the fell winter in the wild, came at last to Thingol, seeking refuge, and the March Wardens brought them to the king. And some said that all the enemy had withdrawn northwards, and others that Glaurung abode still in the halls of Felagund. And some said that the Mormegil was slain, and others that he was cast under a spell by the dragon, and dwelt there yet, as one changed to stone. But all declared that it was known to many in Nargothrond ere the end that Mormegil was none other than Turin, son of Hurin of Dorlomin. So, conflicting reports out of Nargothrond from the survivors, but at the very least they're able to confirm that Mormegil, the Black Sword, is Turin. So finally, we've got Morwen, Nienor, and King Thingol all know, not what happened to Turin, but at least that all of these deeds of valor can now be assigned to Turin, right? Then Morwen was distraught, and refusing the counsel of Melian, she rode forth alone into the wild to seek her son, or some true tidings of him. Thingol therefore sent Mablung after her, with many hardy marchwards, to find her and guard her, and to learn what news they might, but Nienor was bidden to remain behind. Yet the fearlessness of her house was hers, and in an evil hour, in hope that Morwen would return when she saw that her daughter would go with her into peril, Nienor disguised herself as one of Thingol's people, and went with that ill-fated riding. So she snuck in and went with the elves to follow after Morwen. Hi, Gray. They came upon Morwen by the banks of Sirion, and Mablung besought her to return to Menegroth. But she was fey, and would not be persuaded. Then also the coming of Nienor was revealed, and despite Morwen's command, she would not go back. And Mablung perforce brought them to the hidden fairies at the mares of Twilight, and they passed over Sirion. Gray. Rude. Gray. Come on. Gray. Move it. Gray. Go on. Thank you. I love you, but you're in the way. Okay. Sorry about the plane noise. It doesn't happen all the time, but it decided to happen now, huh? Okay, so Nienor refuses to go back. And so Mablung brings them to the hidden fairies at the mares of Twilight, and they passed over Sirion. And after 3 days' journeying, they came to Amon Ethir, the hill of spies, that long ago Felagund had caused to be raised with great labor, a league before the doors of Nargothrond. There Mablung set a guard of riders about Morwen and her daughter, and forbade them to go further. But he, seeing from the hill no sign of any enemy, went down with his scouts to the Narog, as stealthily as they could go. But Glaurung was aware of all that they did, and he came forth in heat of wrath, and lay into the river, and a vast vapor and foul reek went up, in which Mablung and his company were blinded and lost. Then Glaurung passed east over Narog. Seeing the onset of the dragon, the guards upon Amon Ethir sought to lead Morwen and Nienor away, and fly with them with all speed back eastwards. But the wind bore the blank mists upon them, and their horses were maddened by the dragon stench, and were ungovernable, and ran this way and that, so that some were dashed against trees and were slain, and others were borne far away. Thus the ladies were lost. And of Morwen indeed no sure tidings came ever to Doriath after. But Nienor, being thrown by her steed, yet unhurt, made her way back to Amon Ethir, there to await Mablung, and came thus above the reek into the sunlight, and looking westward, she stared straight into the eyes of Glaurung, whose head lay upon the hilltop. Her will strove with his for a while, but he put forth his power, and having learned who she was, he constrained her to gaze into his eyes, and he laid a spell of utter darkness and forgetfulness upon her, so that she could remember nothing that had ever befallen her, nor her own name, nor the name of any other thing. And for many days she could neither hear, nor see, nor stir by her own will. Then Glaurung left her standing alone upon Amon Ethir, and went back to Nargothrond. Now Mablung, who greatly daring had explored the halls of Felagund when Glaurung left them, fled from them at the approach of the dragon, and returned to Amon Ethir. The sun sank, and night fell as he climbed the hill, and he found none there save Nienor, standing alone under the stars as an image of stone. No word she spoke or heard, but would follow if he took up her hand. Therefore, in great grief, he led her away, though it seemed to him in vain, for they were both like to perish, succourless in the wild. But they were found by 3 of Mablung's companions, and slowly they journeyed northward and eastward toward the fences of the land of Doriath beyond Sirion, and the guarded bridge nigh to the inflowing of Skaldwin. Again, Skaldwin is another river. Tolkien loves naming rivers. Slowly the strength of Nienor returned as they drew nearer to Doriath, but she still could not speak or hear, and walked blindly as she was led. But even as they drew near the fences at last, she closed her staring eyes and would sleep. And they laid her down and rested also, unheedfully, for they were utterly outworn. There they were assailed by an orc band, such as now roamed often as nigh the fences of Doriath as they dared. But Nienor in that hour recovered hearing and sight, and being awakened by the cries of the orcs, she sprang up in terror and fled ere they could come to her. Then the orcs gave chase, and the elves after, and they overtook the orcs and slew them ere they could harm her. But Nienor escaped them, for she fled as in a madness of fear, swifter than a deer, and tore off all her clothing as she ran, until she was naked, and she passed out of their sight, running northward. And though they sought her long, they found her not, nor any trace of her. And at last Mablung, in despair, returned to Menegroth and told the tidings. Then Thingol and Melian were filled with grief, but Mablung went forth and sought long in vain for tidings of Morwen and Nienor. But Nienor ran into the woods until she was spent, and then fell and slept and awoke. And it was a sunlit morning, and she rejoiced in light as it were a new thing, and all things else that she saw seemed new and strange, for she had no names for them. Nothing did she remember, save a darkness that lay behind her, and a shadow of fear. Therefore she went warily as a hunted beast, and became famished, for she had no food, and knew not how to seek it. But coming at last to the crossings of Teglin, she passed over, seeking the shelter of the great trees of Brethiel, for she was afraid, and it seemed to her that the darkness was overtaking her again, from which she had fled. Hey, thanks, Maggie. Thank you so much. Yeah, Gandalf's magic would be used very differently by a different writer, for sure. Okay. So she keeps on running. She doesn't know what she's doing. Her memory is completely gone. She doesn't know who she is or what anything is around her, so she doesn't know how to sustain herself. It's a bad situation for Nienor. But it was a great storm of thunder that came up from the south, and in terror she cast herself down upon the mound of Halad and Eleth, stopping her ears from the thunder. But the rain smote her and drenched her, and she lay like a wild beast that is dying. There Turanbar found her, as he came to the crossings of Teglin, having heard rumor of orcs that roamed near, and seeing in a flare of lightning the body, as it seemed, of a slain maiden lying upon the mound of Hinduilas, he was stricken to the heart. But the woodmen lifted her up, and Turanbar cast his cloak about her, and they took her to a lodge nearby, and warmed her, and gave her food. And as soon as she looked upon Turanbar, she was comforted, for it seemed to her that she had found at last something that she had sought in her darkness, and she would not be parted from him. But when he asked her concerning her name and her kin and her misadventure, then she became troubled as a child that perceives that something is demanded but cannot understand what it may be, and she wept. Therefore Turanbar said,
"Do not be troubled. The tale shall wait. But I will give you a name, and I will call you Nienel, Tear Maiden."
And at that name she shook her head, but said, Nienel. That was the first word she spoke after her darkness, and it remained her name among the woodmen ever after. So she's like, that's not right, but sure. She's like, that name doesn't feel right, but okay. I can't offer up a better alternative. Because at this point, she can't even remember how to speak. She doesn't know what is being spoken at her. This is very much a me Tarzan, you Jane moment. Where, Turin is just like, you, Niniel. And she's like, Niniel? Okay. On the next day, they bore her towards Ethelbrandir. But when they came to Dimrost, the rainy stair, where the tumbling stream of Celebros fell toward Teglin, a great shuddering came upon her, wherefore afterwards that place was called Nen Girith, the shuddering water. Ere she came to the home of the woodman upon Amon Obel, she was sick of a fever, and long she lay thus, tended by the women of Brethiel, and they taught her language as to an infant. But ere the autumn came by the skill of Brandir, she was healed of her sickness, and she could speak, but nothing did she remember of the time before she was found by Turanbar on the mound of Halad and Eleth. And Brandir loved her, but all her heart was given to Turanbar. Ah, unrequited love. Poor Brandir. In that time the woodmen were not troubled by the orcs, And Turanbar went not to war, and there was peace in Brethiel. His heart turned to Niniel, and he asked her in marriage. But for that time he delayed in spite of her love, for Brandir foreboded he knew not what, and sought to restrain her rather for her sake than his own or rivalry with Turanbar. And he revealed to her that Turanbar was Turin, son of Hurin, and though she knew not the name, a shadow fell upon her mind. So Brandir's like, no, don't marry him. And it's not necessarily because he loved Niniel, aka Nienor. And he doesn't know, none of them know, that Niniel is actually Nienor and therefore is Turin's sister. Hey! Have fun, Larson. Enjoy your clubbing. And enjoy the replay. But Brandir's like, you don't want to marry him. Because he's Turin. And everybody knows that Hurin and his family were cursed. So maybe not marry him. So he's just like, for your sake, I would highly recommend against this. Highly advise against this. But when 3 years were passed since the sack of Nargothrond, Turanbar asked Niniel again, and vowed that now he would wed her, or else go back to war in the wild. And Niniel took him with joy, and they were wedded at the midsummer, and the woodmen of Brethiel made a great feast. But ere the end of the year, Glaurung sent orcs of his dominion against Brethiel, and Turanbar sat at home deedless, for he had promised to Niniel that he would go to battle only if their homes were assailed. But the woodmen were worsted, and Dorlas upbraided him, and he would not aid the people that he had taken for his own. Then Turanbar arose, and brought forth again his black sword, and he gathered a great company of the men of Brethiel, and they defeated the orcs utterly. But Glaurung heard tidings that the black sword was in Brethiel, and he pondered what he heard, devising new evil. In the spring of the year after Nienel conceived, in the spring of the year after Niniel conceived, and she became wan and sad. And at the same time there came to Ethel Brandir, the first rumors that Glaurung had issued from Nargothrond. Then Turanbar sent out scouts far afield, for now he ordered things as he would, and few gave heed to Brandir. So once again, Turin has sort of unwittingly wrested power. Because, charisma off the charts. Nat 20 charisma every single time. As it drew near to summer, Glaurung came to the borders of Brethiel, and lay near the west shores of Teglin. And then there was a great fear among the woodfolk, for it was now plain that the great worm would assail them and ravage their land, and not pass by returning to Angband as they had hoped. They sought therefore the counsel of Turanbar, and he counselled them that it was vain to go against Glaurung with all their force, for only by cunning and good fortune could they defeat him. He offered therefore himself to seek the dragon on the borders of the land, and bade the rest of the people remain at Ethelbrandir, but to prepare for flight. For if Glaurung had the victory, he would come first to the woodmen's homes to destroy them, and they could not hope to withstand him. But if they then scattered far and wide, then many might escape, for Glaurung would not take up his dwelling in Brethiel, and would return soon to Nargothrond. Then Turanbar asked for companions willing to aid him in his peril. I just spoke that like the actors in Lord of the Rings. Peril. And Dorlas stood forth, but no others. Therefore Dorlas upbraided the people and spoke scorn of Brandir, who could not play the part of the heir of the house of Halad, and Brandir was shamed before his people and was bitter at heart. But Hunthor, kinsman of Brandir, asked his leave to go in his stead. Then Turanbar said farewell to Nienel, and she was filled with fear and foreboding, and their parting was sorrowful. But Turanbar set out with his 2 companions and went to Nen Girith. And we do have another illustration, so I'm going to show that off. So many illustrations in this chapter, I swear. Alright, here we go again. So this is the shuddering waters. This is that staircase where when they are bearing Nienor, she starts shuddering and she's fearful. But those are the men of Brethil, taking her up the stairs into Brethil. You can tell that's Brethil from all of the really tall trees. It's one of the defining attributes of the area. So, nothing too wild, but again, not an illustration I think I've seen before. Thanks, Ted Nasmith. Alright, let's continue, shall we? There's going to be another illustration, like one more page. Don't get too comfortable. Okay, so Turanbar has set out toward Nen Girith. Then Nienel, being unable to endure her fear, and unwilling to wait in the Ethel, tidings of Turanbar's fortune, set forth after him, and a great company went with her. At this, Brandir was filled all the more with dread, and he sought to dissuade her and the people that would go with her from this rashness, but they heeded him not. This is an ongoing theme. Brandir and Gwyndor, both with the right ideas, and nobody listens to them. Therefore he renounced his lordship, and all love for the people that had scorned him, and having not left but his love for Nienel, he girt himself with a sword and went after her. But being lame, he fell far behind. So he's trying to go after them. He actually, grabs a sword and goes after them, but being lame, he can't move easily. Now Turanbar came to Nen Girith at sundown, and there he learned that Glaurung lay on the brink of the high shores of Teglin, and was like to move when night fell. Then he called those tidings good, for the dragon lay at Kabed and Aras, where the river ran in a deep and narrow gorge that a hunted deer might overleap, and Turanbar thought that he would seek no further, but would attempt to pass over the gorge. Therefore he proposed to creep down at dusk and descend into the ravine under night, and cross over the wild water, then to climb up the further cliff, and so come to the dragon beneath his guard. So he's going to go into the cleft of this cliffside and try and, creep up the opposite side past Glaurung's defenses. This counsel he took, but the heart of Dorlas failed when they came to the races of Teglin in the dark, and he dared not attempt the perilous crossing, but drew back and lurked in the woods, burdened with shame. Turanbar and Hunthor, nonetheless, crossed over in safety, for the loud roaring of the water drowned all other sounds, and Glaurung slept. But ere the middle night, the dragon roused, and with a great noise and blast cast his forward part across the chasm, and began to draw his bulk after. Turanbar and Hunthor were well nigh overcome by the great heat and the stench, and they sought in haste for a way up to come at Glaurung. But Hunthor was slain by a great stone that dislodged from on high by the passage of the dragon, and smote him on the head and cast him into the river. So he ended, and the house of Halad not the least valiant. So that's actually the last remnant of the house of Halad. Which, considering how long that house managed to survive, it's pretty impressive. But what a way to go. Just, the dragon moves, a big rock tumbles down, hits you in the head, and boom, gone. Then Turanbar summoned all his will and courage, and climbed the cliff alone, and came beneath the dragon. Then he drew Gurthang, and with all the might of his arm, and all of his hate, he thrust it into the soft belly of the worm, even up to the hilts. But when Glaurung felt his death pang, he screamed, and in his dreadful throe he heaved up his bulk and hurled himself across the chasm, and there lay lashing and coiling in his agony. And he set all in a blaze about him, and beat all to ruin, until at last his fires died, and he lay still. Now Gurthang had been wrested from Turanbar's hand in the throe of Glaurung, and it clave into the belly of the dragon. Turanbar, therefore, crossed the water once more, desiring to recover his sword, and to look upon his foe. And he found him stretched at his length, and rolled upon one side, and the hilt of Gurthang stood in his belly. Then Turanbar seized the hilts, and set his foot upon the belly, and cried in mockery of the dragon, and his words at Nargothrond.
Hail, worm of Morgoth, well met again. Die now, and the darkness have thee. Thus is Turin, son of Hurin, avenged.
Then he wrenched out the sword, but a spout of black blood followed it, and fell on his hand, and the venom burned it. And thereupon Glaurung opened his eyes and looked upon Turanbar with such malice that it smote him as a blow. And by that stroke and the anguish of the venom he fell into a dark swoon, and lay as one dead, and his sword was beneath him. So, can we just appreciate some of these very strange but specific aspects of the dragon? That his blood is venomous and burns things. It's, I guess acidic. It's caustic. Just his blood alone. And so between that and his glare at Turin, we end up with Turin being in a swoon. So he looks dead. He's not, but he looks it. The screams of Glaurung rang in the woods, and came to the people that waited at Nen Girith. And when those that looked forth heard them, and saw afar the ruin and burning that the dragon made, they deemed that he had triumphed, and was destroying those that assailed him. And Niniel sat and shuddered beside the falling water, and at the voice of Glaurung her darkness crept upon her again, so that she could not stir from that place of her own will. Pardon me. Even so Brandir found her, for he came to Nan Girith at last, limping wearily. And when he heard that the dragon had crossed the river and had beaten down his foes, his heart yearned toward Niniel in pity. Yet he thought also,
Turanbar is dead, but Niniel lives. Now it may be that she will come with me, and I will lead her away, and so we shall escape from the dragon together.
Sorry about that. Pressed the wrong button. After a while, therefore, he stood by Niniel and said,
Come, it is time to go. If you will, I will lead you.
And he took her hand, and she rose silently, and followed him, and in the darkness none saw them go. But as they went down the path to the crossings, But as they went down the path to the crossings, the moon rose and cast a grey light on the land. And Niniel said,
Is this the way?
And Brandir answered that he knew no way, save to flee as they might from Glaurung and escape into the wild. But Niniel said,
The black sword was my beloved and my husband. To seek him only do I go. What else could you think?
And she sped on before him. Thus she came towards the crossings of Teglin, and beheld Howth and Elif in the white moonlight, and great dread came on her. Then with a cry she turned away, casting off her cloak, and fled southward along the river, and her white raiment shone in the moon. Thus Brandir saw her from the hillside, and turned to cross her path, but he was still behind her when she came to the ruin of Glaurung, nigh the brink of Cabed and Aras. There she saw the dragon lying, but she heeded him not, for a man lay beside him, and she ran to Turanbar and called his name in vain. Then, finding that his hand was burned, she washed it with tears, and bound it with a strip of her raiment. And she kissed him and cried on him again to wake. Thereat Glaurung stirred, for the last time ere he died, and he spoke with his last breath, saying,
Hail, Nienord, daughter of Hurin. We meet again at the end. I give thee joy that thou hast found thy brother at last. And now thou shalt know him, a stabber in the dark, treacherous to foes, faithless to friends, and a curse unto his kin. Turin, son of Urin. But the worst of all his deeds thou shalt feel in thyself.
Then Glaurung died, and the veil of his malice was taken from her, and she remembered all the days of her life. Looking down upon Turin, she cried,
Farewell, O twice beloved. A Turin Turanbar, Turin Ambartanen. Master of doom by doom mastered. O happy to be dead.
Then Brandir, who had heard all, standing stricken upon the edge of ruin, hastened towards her. But she ran from him, distraught with horror and anguish, and coming to the brink of Cabed and Aras, she cast herself over, and was lost in the wild water. Then Brandir came and looked down, and turned away in horror, and though he no longer desired life, he could not seek death in that roaring water. And thereafter no man looked again upon Cabed and Aras, nor would any beast or bird come there, nor any tree grow. And it was named Cabin Nairamarth, the leap of dreadful doom. But Brandir made his way back to Nengirith to bring tidings to his people, and he met Dorlas in the woods and slew him, the first blood that ever he had spilled, and the last. And he came to Nengirith, and men cried to him, Have you seen her? For Nienel is gone. And he answered,
Nienel is gone forever. The dragon is dead, and Turanbar is dead, and those tidings are good.
The people murmured at these words, saying that he was crazed, but Brandir said,
Hear me to the end. Niniel the beloved is also dead. She cast herself into Teglin, desiring life no more, for she learned that she was none other than Nienor, daughter of Hurin of Dorlomin, ere her forgetfulness came upon her, and that Turanbar was her brother, Turin, son of Hurin.
But even as he ceased, and the people wept, Turin himself came before them, for when the dragon died, his swoon left him, and he fell into a deep sleep of weariness. But the cold of the night troubled him, and the hilts of Gurthang drove into his side, and he awoke. Then he saw that one had tended his hand, and he wondered much that it was left nonetheless, that he was left nonetheless to lie upon the cold ground. And he called, and hearing no answer, he went in search of aid, for he was weary and sick. But when the people saw him, they drew back in fear, thinking that it was his unquiet spirit. And he said,
Nay, be glad, for the dragon is dead, and I live. But wherefore have you scorned my counsel and come into peril? And where is Niniel? For her I would see, and surely you did not bring her from her home.
Then Brandir told him that it was so, and Niniel was dead. But the wife of Dorlas cried out,
Nay, Lord, he is crazed, for he came here saying that you were dead, and he called it good tidings. But you live.
Then Turanbar was wrathful, and believed that all Brandir said or did was done in malice towards himself and Niniel, begrudging their love, and he spoke evilly to Brandir, calling him Clubfoot. Mean, so rude. Then Brandir reported all that he had heard, and named Niniel Nienor, daughter of Hurin. And he cried out upon Turanbar with the last words of Glaurung, that he was a curse unto his kin, and to all that harbored him. Then Turanbar fell into a fury, for in those words he heard the feet of his doom overtaking him. And he charged Brandir with leading Niniel to her death, and publishing with delight the lies of Glaurung, if indeed he devised them not himself. Then he cursed Brandir, and slew him, and he fled from the people into the woods. But after a while his madness left him, and he came to Howth and Elith, and there sat and pondered all his deeds. And he cried upon Finduilas to bring him counsel, for he knew not whether he would do now more ill to go to Doriath to seek his kin, or to forsake them forever and seek death in battle. So he's taking a moment and, crying, because a lot just happened. And he's trying to figure out what to do next, because he knows it's true that he's cursed and he's bringing, dark woe to everyone around him. So he's like, would it be best that I just die in battle, or should I actually go home finally and try and find any remnant of my family? But I do think it bears summarizing here that Niniel, or Nienor finds Turin at the dragon, sees that he's not dead, tends his hand, and then when she realizes, when the spell is lifted and the dragon is like, ha ha, joke's on you, she realizes that not only has she married her brother, but she has conceived a child with him. So she's pregnant with her brother's child. And that freaks her the fuck out, and she casts herself over the edge. Brandir sees this, and he, having not been close enough to Turin to assess the damage, assumes that Turin is dead, Niniel is dead, and the dragon is dead. Ding dong, the dragon's dead. And so he goes back and, gives this information to his people. But when Turin suddenly shows up because he comes out of his stupor, it makes Brandir look really bad that he had lied on purpose, even though he hadn't. And so Brandir reveals the truth to Turin. Turin is shocked and wrathful, thinking that all of this was just Brandir's fault. And so he slays him and then runs off. And even as he sat there, Mablung with his company of grey elves came over the crossings of Teiwin, and he knew Turin, and hailed him, and was glad indeed to find him yet living, for he had learned of the coming forth of Glaurung, and that his path led to Brethiel. And also he had heard report that the black sword of Nargothrond now dwelt there. Therefore he came to give warning to Turin, and help if need be. But Turin said,
"You come too late. The dragon is dead."
Then they marveled and gave him great praise, but he cared nothing for it, and said,
"This only I ask. Give me news of my kin, for in Dorlomin I learned that they had gone to the Hidden Kingdom."
Then Mablung was dismayed, but needs must tell to Turin how Morwen was lost, and Nienor cast into a spell of dumb forgetfulness, and how she escaped them upon the borders of Doriath, and fled northwards. Then at last Turin knew that doom had overtaken him, and he had slain Brandir unjustly, so that the words of Glaurung were fulfilled in him. And he laughed as one fey, crying,
This is a bitter jest indeed."
But he bade Mablung go and return to Doriath with curses upon it.
"And a curse too upon your errand,"
He cried.
"This only was wanting. Now comes the night."
Then he fled from them like the wind, and they were amazed, wondering what madness had seized him, and they followed after him, but Turin far outran them. And he came to Cabaden Aras, and heard the roaring of the water, and saw that all the leaves fell sere from the trees, as though winter had come. There he drew forth his sword, that now alone remained to him of all his possessions, and he said,
"Hail, Gurthang! No lord or loyalty dost thou know, save the hand that wieldeth thee. From no blood wilt thou shrink. Wilt thou therefore take Turanbar? Wilt thou slay me swiftly?"
And from the blade rang a cold voice in answer.
"Yea, I will drink thy blood gladly, that so I may forget the blood of Beleg my master, and the blood of Brandir slain unjustly. I will slay thee swiftly."
Then Turin set the hilts upon the ground, and cast himself upon the point of Gurthang, and the black blade took his life. But Mablung and the elves came and looked on the shape of Glaurung lying dead, and upon the body of Turin, and they grieved. And when men of Brethiel came thither, and they learned the reasons of Turin's madness and death, they were aghast. And Mablung said bitterly,
"I also have been meshed in the doom of the children of Hurin, and thus with my tidings have slain one that I loved."
Then they lifted up Turin, and found that Gurthang had broken asunder. But elves and men gathered there great store of wood, and they made a mighty burning, and the dragon was consumed to ashes. Turin they laid in a high mound where he had fallen, and the shards of Gurthang were laid beside him, And when all was done, the elves sang a lament for the children of Hurin. And a great grey stone was set upon the mound, and thereon was carven in runes of Doriath, Turin Turanbar, Dagnir Glaurunga. And beneath they wrote also, Nienor Niniel. But she was not there, nor was it ever known whither the cold waters of Teglin had taken her. And thus ends chapter 21. So that is the sad, sad story of Turin Turanbar. After all that hardship and all those great deeds of valor, he ends up unknowingly wedding and seeding his sister. She kills herself when she realizes. And then when he realizes, he's not feeling too good about himself either. And he basically takes his sword and casts himself down upon it. Gurthang is one of very few swords, if not the only sword to my knowledge, that actually speaks. It's one of those items that manages to speak, much like Huan, who was the Hound of Valinor. He's a hound, and he was only allowed to speak with human words 3 times. With mortal words, rather. Mortal? Immortal? I don't know. He's able to speak only thrice in his lifetime, and all 3 times he does it to Luthien. So Turin has a bad, bad time. He kills his best friend, he eventually seeds his sister, and it's somewhat like Romeo and Juliet in that when they realize what they've done, they slay themselves. So Brandir had been telling the truth. He thought that everyone was dead. And he did tell the truth, saying, no, she's Nienor, that's your sister. Now we know, because the dragon said so. And Turin was just like, you lie, you lie. Turns out he wasn't lying. So Gurthang, the sword. Note on Gurthang. Gurthang might be, this is a big might, it might be the sword that we saw in one of the teaser posters for the Rings of Power, because we saw a black blade that was broken and had a really sort of interesting hilt to it. I find it interesting that it's constantly referred to as hilts plural. So the construction of Gurthang is very unique. So I think that, with that and with the knowledge that the sword was laid on the mound there, but wasn't buried or lost or any of that. The blade was just left there. Especially because of where this mound ends up being. So fast forward to the end of the first age, the War of Wrath, which we'll eventually get to. Most of Beleriand ends up under the ocean. It ends up broken and under the ocean. One of the few places that does not end up under the ocean is the place where Turin died, where he has that little mound erected. So technically, in the Second Age, his burial spot and Gurthang are both still above sea level. They're still there. They're just surrounded by an awful lot of ocean at that point. But it is conceivable that someone could go out there and reclaim Gurthang, the broken black sword, whose original name is Anglahel. So it could be Anglahel in one of those teaser posters. We shall see. I have no way of proving that. It is just a theory. But it would be a very interesting thing for them to work into an original plot, because it is one of those open-ended things. Tolkien never mentions anything else about Anglahel after that. But it is an interesting little note that it's one of the few places that doesn't end up under the ocean at the end of the first age. So that's kind of significant, and it could be a really interesting plot point. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with that, if they do anything with that. Because theoretically, Sauron could go and get that sword, and give it to someone knowing that the blade is basically cursed. He could give it to someone and use it as a tool to hopefully bring down a party, right? Because we know that there are so many original characters, I could totally see them doing that. That Gurthang is gifted to somebody. And it adds to the drama, perhaps gets reforged. I mean, we do have Eregion with Celebrimbor and these amazing jewel smiths. So, who knows? Sauron himself as Anatar could bring Gurthang to the smiths and have them reforge this sword. We don't know. But it would be a really interesting thing to do with the plot, I think. So we'll see if that happens, but that's why people were freaking out when they saw the sword in those teaser posters, because we were like, oh, that looks like Anglahel. It looks like Anglahel. Which is, you know, a very, very iconic sword from the Silmarillion. So we don't see a lot of swords with that kind of history. So the thought of bringing that sword back for some sort of plot point in the Second Age, even though that is not something that was written by Tolkien, it's still... This is like a good fanfic. That's a good plot point in a fanfic, because it's open-ended. The fate of Anglahel is never really disclosed by Tolkien, so it's a possibility. This is plausible, right? With Mythbusters, this is plausible. You could have this happen. So even though it's not canon, it's not going against canon either. Which is usually what good fanfiction does, right? It takes existing little hints and does something unique with them while still keeping the canon in place. So I think it would be interesting for them to do that. We shall see what happens. But that is the end of chapter 21. So we are now about two-thirds of the way through. So that's kind of exciting. Now there was one other picture, so let's share that really quickly, and then we'll call it a day, I think. So, one more picture. There we go. Sorry. I'm getting used to my camera again because I had it flipped for a while there. I had it on the other side of my desk. So this is Turin down here. It's kind of hard to see him, but him creeping up from the cliffside here and stabbing Glaurung with Gurthang. Yeah, it's a bit of a depressing chapter, granted. It would be an interesting reveal partway through the season, I agree. But yes, the tale of Turin Turanbar, much like Beren and Luthien, like these are two of the biggest, like most involved and detailed tales that Tolkien includes in the First Age. This one's definitely, I think, sadder. Because it's sad that Beren and Luthien choose a mortal life and die, but that's ultimately a happy ending for them. It's what they wanted. Versus here, everybody dies. Everybody except Moblung. Moblung is like the only surviving member here. But everybody dies. The forest burns. And it's, accidental incest leads to suicide. Not a great time. Not a great time for these characters. But what a great illustration of Glaurung. I love the way Ted Nasmith draws dragons. With the red eyes and everything, I like it. I like it. And they are referred to as worms. So that is something to keep in mind, that these are worms. These are not flying dragons. Not at this point. They are considered worms. So they stay on the ground. Later on, I believe we do have flying dragons, but Glaurung is a worm, and he's referred to as such. So no wings on this dragon. So this is very accurate. Yeah, everybody dies and they do so in anguish. Basically, it's not a happy time. Not a happy time for anybody. Okay, so let's take a look at what's coming up next. So chapter 22 is Of the Ruin of Doriath. So badness is about to go down at Doriath. And then we have chapter 23 is of Tuor and the Fall of Gondolin. Tuor being the son of Huor, and therefore the cousin of Turin, because their fathers are brothers. Oh man, such pretty pictures. So we can definitely do chapter 22 next time. If we have time, we might also do chapter 23. But all we have is 22, 23, and 24. There are only 24 chapters in the Quinta Silmarillion, so we're getting close. Getting close to the end of the actual Quinta Silmarillion, but there's still plenty more in the book itself, because the Silmarillion is a collection of stories, not just the Quinta Silmarillion. I do this every Saturday, yes, until we finish the book, okay? And once we finish this book, I will probably... I've really wanted to read the Lays of Beleriand, so I might... Yes, it is simul-streamed on Twitch, yes. I am here both on Twitch and YouTube, and I do simul-stream on TikTok to try and... Because my following is primarily on TikTok at the moment. I just passed 40k, so yay! But getting more of you to go over to my YouTube is far more preferable. If you are looking to support me, yes, all of the links are in the Linktree link in my bio. So if you need to find me on any platform, all of the links are there. I am not part of the affiliate program on Twitch, so I don't have subscriptions, I don't have ads. There's no real way for you to support me on Twitch. So if you are choosing between Twitch and YouTube, please follow me on YouTube. That's where I need the watch hours in order to activate AdSense and actually get paid. Every little bit helps. But yes, it's Wizardway Kris on everything, so I'm very easy to find. I've thought about rebranding to Resident Elf Boy, but I'm already established as Wizardway Kris, and I chose that name specifically so I could do anything fantasy related. I started with Harry Potter stuff, but J.K. Rowling pisses me off, so I sort of gave that up and moved more into Tolkien, which is my original fandom. This is like one of the first fandoms I was ever involved in. Hit me hard in high school, and I've been here ever since. So over 20 years now, which is really cool. And it's what brought me and my partner together. So the Tolkien fandom will always be a very special fandom for me. Other than that, I was part of the Sailor Moon fandom back around the same time. But Tolkien is by far my longest standing fandom, and the one I've been the most passionate about. So what I do, in case you're unfamiliar with me, what I do is I translate things into Elvish. That's my thing. My partner is the one who taught me Elvish back when I was in high school. I took her online courses to learn how to read, write, and speak Elvish. We eventually later on met and then fell for each other. And so I was with her for 12 years until 2019 when she passed away. She went in her sleep suddenly one night and gone. So, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, it's really sad, and I don't deny that, and I go through depressive spurts relatively often. I don't hide that, but it's also the best way you could hope for someone to go, right? Peacefully in their sleep. So she went in her sleep. I can't really complain because that's the best way you could possibly go. But it is sad. And so in her memory, I started relearning Elvish, getting my knowledge up to date, which meant taking her lessons over again, which I did. And I made lessons on TikTok for those. When I get to 50K, there will be a playlist function, and I can put all of that into a proper playlist for you guys. But it's really far down my feed at this point. But I did do Elvish lessons. Keep in mind, that's Neo-Sindarin based on 2004. So since then, a lot of things have changed because more notes from Tolkien have been made available. So the way that we use Neo-Sindarin now is quite different. But at the time, back in 2004, that was to the best of our knowledge. So my lessons are outdated. I'm working on newer ones. I'm working with Fiona Jallings, who is the linguist who wrote the book A Fan's Guide to Neo-Sindarin, which is honestly, to my knowledge, the most comprehensive book that you can buy to learn Elvish, and it's the most up-to-date version of Elvish. So I'm working with her. She has given me permission to make video lessons based on her book lessons. So it's an ongoing project. I haven't had time to really do much of it, but that's the goal. That is the goal, to make Elvish lessons for everybody. They are going to be free, because her lessons are also available for free, just written lessons that she's done online. So I'm going to do something very similar, but just in an audio-visual format. So there will be videos, and that will be on YouTube as well. So most of the stuff will be free, but if you want to do more exercises, some role play exercises, homework assignments where I'll actually grade stuff for you, that sort of thing is more personal attention. That's like private study sessions kind of thing. So that will be for patrons, people who actually, want to pay me for my time. But the lessons themselves with basics are going to be free. So that is the goal. That is what I do. That's why I am self-proclaimed the resident elf boy of TikTok. My specialty lies primarily in the Silmarillion. Like, this is my bread and butter right here. I love this book. Honestly, reading it cover to cover, this is only my second time. Which is astounding, considering how much I have read the Silm. But most of the time, like, I read it all the way through at the beginning when I first got into it. And I've just referenced bits or reread, a chapter here, a chapter there. But this is only my second time reading it cover to cover, which is really fun. So I'm doing that with all of you, and it makes it a lot of fun for me. And it's my first time reading aloud, too, so hopefully you guys are enjoying it. But I will be doing a lot more live streams, especially now that I have my new mic, because this is my beautiful new mic. I now have a binaural mic, so this enables me to do ASMR streaming. The microphone has ears, because it funnels the sound into the two microphones, and then I'm able to, it's called panning. I'm able to pan them to the left ear and the right ear, so when you wear headphones, it sounds like you're right here. And it means that I can whisper into each ear, and it makes for a much more 3D experience, sound-wise, aurally. So I have a bunch of fun tools, I have instruments, I do humming and singing and all that sort of stuff. So there will be ASMR streams soon, and I will probably incorporate my reading of Tolkien's poetry, doing like the Lay of Luthien or the Lay of the Children of Hurin, which is the story that we just read from the Silmarillion, but it's in verse. It's the epic poem version. And I love Tolkien's poetry, and it's so much fun to say aloud that I think I'll have a lot of fun with that. So that, and I'd like to read some other stuff too. I thought that it would be really relaxing to do... Ooh, I just got really, really dizzy. That's new. I'm okay. That was very suddenly here and then suddenly gone again. I'm okay. But I think I'd like to read Frank Baum, which is The Wizard of Oz. I think I'd like to read the Oz books because it's very easy reading. It's not nearly as difficult as Tolkien. But I could do that as, you know, like a softly spoken or even whispered, doing like bedtime stories kind of thing. I think it would be fun to read The Wizard of Oz and stuff like that. So I have a lot of things that I'd like to try. So hopefully you guys will join me with all these fun things I'm trying out. I'm super excited to have my new microphone though. I have a mixer, I'm messing around with stuff. I need to come up with a bunch of new filters, audio filters for the binaural mic, because I have plenty of filters for this one, for my normal Yeti mic. But yeah, so multiple microphones, sound effects. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm getting very excited about it. It means I will be streaming a bit more often too, because right now I'm really regularly only streaming once a week, and that's Saturday. So I do Silmarillion Saturdays. We will keep doing that until we finish the Silmarillion. So we have 3 more chapters in the Quinta Silmarillion. After that, we will be hitting the Akalabeth, which is about the fall of Numenor. Now this will be important information going into the TV show that's coming out, The Rings of Power. Because while they don't have the rights to the Akalabeth, they don't have any of the rights from the Silmarillion, they do have the rights to the appendices in The Lord of the Rings, which at some point I'll have to review as well, because that's what they actually have the rights to. And Amazon just now bought out MGM, so Amazon now owns the rights to Hobbit. They own the rights to The Hobbit now, too. Now, that doesn't really impact the Rings of Power show very much, because not a lot happens in The Hobbit that is actually tied to the Rings of Power, other than Gollum having the ring, playing a game with Bilbo, and Bilbo gets the ring. Not very much of that impacts the story in the Second Age, which is several thousand years prior. But we see now that Amazon and Bezos in general is really working to try and consolidate the rights to Tolkien's world so that he can do something really sweeping and overarching. I guarantee you that Bezos would pay the money, the ridiculous amount of money necessary. He will probably try to get the rights to the Silmarillion. I don't know that the Tolkien estate is ever going to give those rights up. They've been super, super hesitant. Understandably so. But they have not wanted to give up the rights to the Silm. If they were to give up the rights to the Silm, not only would the price be exorbitant, but I think the only one able and willing to pay for those rights would be Bezos. So, we'll see if that eventually happens. I have no idea. Because I highly doubt that the Tolkien estate is going to sell those rights. But if anyone's gonna try and go after them, it would definitely be Jeffrey Bezos. Jeffrey Bezos. We'll see. We'll see what Amazon does, but they're actively seeking the rights. If they take over the rights for Lord of the Rings, Lord help us. Oh yeah, Elvish is great. It's not the easiest. You have to really get a feel for all of the mutations that happen. Honestly, the Prestaneth, or the mutations, that's the hardest aspect of Neo-Sindarin, for sure. Quenya is easier entry level Elvish, despite it being a bit more. It's complicated, but I think it's easier for a lot of people to learn because things don't mutate. It's an agglutinative language, meaning that there are a lot of suffixes that are appended onto the end of a word to change its meaning. So if you have a verb root, you can conjugate the verb, make it past tense, present tense, whatever, future tense. Then you can add who the subject is doing the action, who the subject receiving the action is. So you could go from love, like to love, the verb to love, to loved, past tense, to I loved, past tense, to I loved you, or I loved her. And you can do all of that using suffixes. It's really cool. It's a little complicated, but once you get the hang of it, it's a lot easier to adapt to than all of the crazy things that happen because of mutations in Sindarin. So that's a basic difference, but that's called an agglutinative language. Example of that in the real world is Finnish, which Tolkien did use as one of the base languages to inspire Quenya. There you go. You learned something. You're always learning shit with me. So, agglutinative. I only recently learned that word, but once I learned what it meant, I was like, yes. I knew that Quenya did that, I just didn't know there was a term for it. It would be cool to get some visual content before society collapses, indeed. It's one of those things, like, me and every other Tolkien fan, would worry about an adaptation of the Silmarillion, because the Silm is like, it's so iconic, and it is the bedrock. It is the bedrock on which Tolkien's entire world was built. So we worry about anyone who tries to do an adaptation of it, not only because it would be difficult to adapt, which it would be difficult to adapt, but also just, it's so iconic, it would be hard to do well. And I mean, it's one of those things, like the community would be totally split over it if it was a good or bad adaptation, as always. That always happens. But I think the Silm is considered kind of sacred. It's sort of sacrosanct. We don't want anyone to get the rights and then do poorly, right? But it's hard to assess who could actually do that book justice. So we don't know. It would be lovely, though. Oh man, I would love to see a movie version of Beren and Luthien. I think that is... It's a story that stands alone very well. I feel like you could make either a short mini-series or a movie about Beren and Luthien. It's a love story. There's a lot of action. There's a really cool, female protagonist. Hell yeah. She's a Mary Sue. Everyone freaking loves her, and she has magic powers. So she's not the best representation of a female protagonist, but it would be fun to see her kicking ass. So I'd be all for that. So having a movie version or a short mini-series version of Beren and Luthien, I think would be really cool. That one is far more easy to adapt than something like The Children of Turin, which comes off very Game of Thrones-y. Now that Game of Thrones has actually been a series, regardless how you feel about it. Similar elements, lots of political intrigue, there's, accidental incest, there's suicide, there's wrongful deaths. There's a lot of drama in The Children of Turin. which is the story of Turin Turanbar, which is what we just read. So that would be, I think, more difficult to adapt just because it would be too similar. I think it would be seen as too similar. But the other main difference between George R.R. Martin's work and the way that they adapted Game of Thrones versus Tolkien's work is Tolkien's work is not sexual. It's never sexual. It is not inherently written that way. It's never been written that way. So you look at a movie like Lord of the Rings, and while some of the characters are sexy, they aren't intentionally made sexy. It's not performative. You know, Aragorn opens a door all grunge-like, and everyone's like, but it wasn't intended to be an "and everybody wants him" moment. That was never the point. There are no sex scenes in Tolkien. There are a couple seductions, but he means that in the broader sense. Not just a seduction of somebody's body, but a seduction of someone's mind. When Melkor seduces Mairon, and that's Morgoth and Sauron. When Sauron goes from the good side to the bad side, Tolkien calls that a seduction. He also calls it a seduction when Sauron seduces Celebrimbor into making the Rings of Power, and basically being like co-rulers with him. That is considered a seduction. It isn't necessarily sexual. It could be. And fandom definitely takes that and runs with it. This is why we have the fandom. There are ship names for these two specifically. Melkor and Mairon is called Angbang, Angbang. It should be pronounced Angbang, but Angbang is what most people call it, because the dwelling of the dark forces in the first age is Angband with a D at the end. So Angbang is like them banging. So it's like the two major big baddies. So that's Morgoth and Sauron. Their ship name is Angbang. Sauron and Celebrimbor, or Anatar and Celebrimbor, is either called Silverfisting or Silver Gifting, because Celebrimbor means Silverfist. That's what Celebrimbor's name means. It means Silverfist. And Anatar is the gift giver, which is Sauron's disguise that he takes in the Second Age. So when you smush those names together, you end up with Silver Gifting or Silverfisting. Depends on if you decide to make them kinky. People who make their fanfiction kinky tend to go with Silverfisting. Right. It shows the deeper meanings of love and seduction. Exactly. It's not meant to be taken at face value, seduce, and boink. That's not how Tolkien wrote. He's far more cerebral and intellectual with his writing. So it's not meant to be visceral like that. There are moments when Tolkien's very visceral, but his writing tends to be more on the dry historical text side of things, which is not bad. It's just it's a completely different writing style. You don't get invested. There aren't people going to whorehouses on the page. Could those have existed? Sure, but Tolkien never writes about them. Because it's not important. It's not important to his plot. It's not important to a character development. In some ways, sex is very idealized in Tolkien's world, and that probably, comes back to him being Catholic and having a certain mindset about sex and intimacy, and sort of that trickles down into his world. But he doesn't talk too much about it, not in the main texts. He talks a bit more about it in supplemental texts, in the history of Middle-earth and stuff like that. And also in the Nature of Middle-earth, which I'm still reading. But Tolkien's idea of seduction is more overarching than a simple physical seduction for the purposes of power and sex. So, yeah, I think people are worried that adaptations of something like The Children of Húrin would end up being more Game of Thrones than Tolkien, which is a worry that people have for the Rings of Power series too. People are really worried that it's, especially when they heard that someone had hired an intimacy coordinator, which I'd like to debunk for a moment. Intimacy coordination is not just for sex scenes. It's for any form of intimacy. You can do fade to black scenes, or scenes that involve making out, scenes where you know that there's sort of that undercurrent of sensuality, even if it's not performed on screen. Do you know what I mean? They help make the actors comfortable. This is especially useful if you are including sensuality that is queer, that is not heterosexual. Like, intimacy coordinators are used for shows like Sex Education, right? Which is a show all about teenagers having sex. So of course you would have an intimacy coordinator for that, because you want all of the actors to be very comfortable. There are certain things that are shown or are not shown. There are trade secrets of how to cover things or how to move things or position things to make the actors comfortable when they're doing these various scenes. But the same thing goes for something far more tame, especially if you're dealing with queerness, because not all the actors who are hired on to do queer roles are queer themselves. So you need someone there to help the actors be really comfortable in doing whatever sensual act is required of them for the role, if they themselves don't identify that way. So the intimacy coordination is not just for sex. It's to make the characters and the actors comfortable doing whatever is required sensually, even if that's just doing something very, oh gosh, what's an example? If anyone's ever seen the show Hannibal, there are some very almost fever-like like sprinklings of sexuality. Some stuff is very erotic in Hannibal, and it's like meant to be erotic in a horror sense, it makes you uncomfortable. But they did a couple sequences, I think it's in season 2 of Hannibal. And I bring up Hannibal specifically because one of the writers for the Rings of Power show is from Hannibal. They also wrote for the Hannibal show. I don't know which part of the show they wrote, but that's why this crossover, it crosses over in a way that makes sense for the argument here. But they had a couple sequences, I think in season 2, where it was very clear that these characters were boinking, but it was very fade to black. Nothing was actually shown, but it was very clear that this was happening. And I think that they could get away with that between Celebrimbor and Anatar in the Rings of Power series. Will they actually do that? I don't know, but that could be one way that an intimacy coordinator would be utilized without there actually being explicit sex. So that's what I'm going for here. There are erotic elements to Hannibal that it would make sense for an intimacy coordinator to be involved with, even though the way that things are filmed and then edited might make them far more tame for the audience. The actors still have to act for those scenes, even if the editing makes it far less physical. So I hope that clears that up. When it comes to intimacy coordination, it's not just a sex thing. So people were getting very, very up in arms about there being an intimacy coordinator for the Rings of Power show, thinking that it would end up becoming more like Game of Thrones, which I don't think it will. I don't think it will. And the creators have even said in interviews that they have no intention of making it sexual like Game of Thrones. So I think we might have hints, and we might have vague sensuality, but they aren't gonna throw titties into every episode. Because ultimately, like, it's not an episode of Game of Thrones if there are no tits in it, right? And I mean, heck, we got some full frontal nudity in there too. I was just like, give equal time, okay? If you're gonna show girls' boobs flying out all over the place, you might as well show us some peen too. And they did. And I was like, okay. It does nothing for me personally. I'm ace, okay? I'm gray sexual. I'm demisexual. I think the proper term for me is anegosexual. It's the, in theory, anyone, in practice, no one. So that's kind of where I'm at. But because of that, it's like I'm relatively disconnected from sex scenes. I don't get titillated by them easily. So I would just see, I'm just like, man, there are a lot of boobs in this show. And I'm not like complaining, but I'm just noting the reality that there are a lot of boobs in this show. And I'm sitting there being a massage therapist, being a kinesiologist, meaning I have a degree in studying human body movement and anatomy and physiology. So I'm looking at Game of Thrones and I'm seeing all boobs that are everywhere. And I'm analyzing the different kinds of breasts. Like, it's doing nothing for me. I'm just like, wow, her areolas are larger, or hers are so much smaller, or her nipples are higher up than like the other actresses. That's about as far into it as I got. Completely different mindset. So if there is sensuality, I'm all for it, especially if it's representation of a queer relationship in canon. Definitely all for that. I would highly support that. I would be thrilled. But I'm not in it to get off. I'm in it for representation. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm the queer kid making Tolkien content, right? All right, but we have finished, I think, for today. So next week we will do chapter 22 and maybe 23. If we do 22 and 23, it means that the week following that will be chapter 24, and that will be the end of the Quenta Silmarillion. And then we'll move on to the Akalabeth, which I know I've read, but it's been a very long time. Because I'm so focused on the elves and not mortal men or the Númenóreans, I know I read the Akalabeth at some point, but it's been a long time, so it's going to be almost like new information for me again. So it'll be good for me to reread it, because it's been a long time. But thank you guys. Thank you for all the hearts and likes and stuff. I appreciate that. So tomorrow is my birthday. I'm not sure if I'll stream. I'm not sure. I've thought about it, especially with my new mic. Trying out some stuff on stream would be kind of fun for my birthday. If you'd like to do something nice for my birthday, you can join my Patreon, where you'll get stuff. Like, you join Patreon, you get perks, right? So you get something back out of it. If you want to just give me something for my birthday, which you're welcome to do, but you don't have to, there is a link in my bio. It just says wishlist or gift list. I think it says wishlist. That'll take you to my throne list, and I do have the link up here on my YouTube and Twitch as well. The thronegifts.com/u/wizardwaychris. So that is a way that you can take a look at all the little tiny things that I am looking to buy eventually. For the Valinor house, for streaming, for ASMR, for my Starscape pendants, which I use nail polishes for. I have a ton of nail polishes in that list. So if you want to buy me something small, that's a way to do so. It keeps my information private, but allows you to get me something for my birthday. You don't have to, but if you want to, that's where you go to do it. But thanks, guys. I'm going to go get a churro tomorrow. That is the birthday gift for self. I know there was something else I was planning on doing with my family, too. We'll see. Because now I live right next door to my sister. So, we're going to go out and get churros tomorrow. Woo! But everybody have a good day. Have a good week. If I don't stream tomorrow, you will at least see me back next Saturday for the next Silmarillion Saturday, where I read the Silmarillion so you don't have to. And so that you pick up on stuff and don't get overwhelmed by names, because good God, Tolkien likes to make references to like every river ever. Today's chapter was especially heavy with the river names. And it's so easy to get overwhelmed by it, especially if you don't know the base language, if you don't know enough Elvish to dissect the names and see, oh, this one means this one means that. Tolkien will occasionally give you the translation, which he did in several places in today's chapter, but often he'll only mention it once and then you're on your own. So it's easy to get overwhelmed, but that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here to help. And then I pull out the map and I show you visually where things are happening, because that helps it sink in a little bit more. So that's what I'm here for. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you're new to the stream, welcome and thank you for being here. But Silmarillion Saturdays, typically between 9 and 11. And am I on Pacific or Mountain Time right now? I think I'm on Pacific. I'm in Arizona. We don't switch our clocks. If we do ratify that rule in the US where everyone stays on daylight savings time, it means I will permanently be in Mountain Time at that point. I'm pretty sure. Actually, no, I take that back. I'll be permanently on Pacific. It gets confusing when you're in Arizona, like, only because everyone else changes their clocks, and I don't. We never switch our clocks here. It means just things get darker in winter and they get brighter in summer. Longer days, longer nights. It's a very slow, gradual shift, and it doesn't bother me nearly as much. You're on Mountain Time. Yeah. I think I'm on Pacific right now. So if we stay forever in the time zones as they currently stand, Arizona will be part of Pacific time. Which is odd, but okay. I think Nevada is also on Pacific. I think it's California, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. Maybe Idaho as well. I'm not sure. Geography! But we'll be part of the Pacific time zone, rather than Mountain, which includes Colorado. And I think Utah right above us. So. It's weird. But everybody take care. Between 9 and 11, typically, Pacific time is when I tend to go live. So I will see you guys next week, if I don't see you tomorrow. Happy birthday, me. And if Annie is still in chat, happy birthday, Annie. My birthday twin in chat. So everybody take care. I will see you guys next week. Bye, guys. There will be more ASMR stuff coming soon. I'm excited. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.